the sacrifice. The acceptance email from Stanford's graduate program glowed on Aisha Sharma's laptop screen. 3 years of relentless work had culminated in this moment: full scholarship, research position, everything she'd dreamed of since undergraduate days at Delhi University. Her trembling fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type her enthusiastic acceptance, when her phone buzzed with her mother's ringtone. "Beta, it's Nani," her mother's voice cracked. "The doctors say it might be Parkinson's. It's progressing quickly." Aisha's heart sank as memories flooded back summers spent in Nani's hillside cottage in Dehradun, learning to make perfect. Rhodas under her patient guidance, listening to stories beneath the mango tree in the courtyard. Nani had raised Aisha after her father's death, when her mother had to work double shifts just to keep them afloat. "I'm coming home," Aisha said without hesitation. 2 weeks later, Aisha stood in the doorway of her grandmother's bedroom, watching. The once formidable matriarch struggled to hold a cup of tea. At 78, Parvati Devi had been the pillar of their extended family, her cottage the gathering place for celebrations and reconciliations alike. "You shouldn't have come," Nani said, noticing Aisha's presence. "Your mother told me about Stanford." Aisha crossed the room and sat beside her grandmother. "Stanford can wait." "Your future cannot," Nani insisted, her hands trembling so badly that Aisha gently took the teacup from her. "You are my future," Aisha replied simply. "And my past, everything in between too." The news of Aisha's decision spread through the family like wildfire. That evening, her cousin Vikram called from his investment banking job in Mumbai. "Have you completely lost your mind?" His voice boomed through the speaker. "You're throwing away Stanford for what? To play nurse in a village? The servants can handle it." "Nani needs family, not servants," Aisha replied, keeping her voice measured. "This is why women from small towns never succeed," Vikram scoffed. "Sentimentality over sense. By the time you're done with this little charity project, your career will be dead before it starts." Before Aisha could respond, she heard the front gate creak open. Through the window, she spotted a familiar figure, Rohan Mathur, her childhood friend and first love, now a successful architect according to the family gossip. They hadn't spoken since that summer 8 years ago, when possibility hung between them like monsoon clouds, heavy with promise, but ultimately swept away when he left for architecture school, and she threw herself into academics. She watched as he hesitated at the garden path, straightening his collar. He'd grown taller, broader at the shoulders, but still had that same uncertain tilt of his head when approaching something that mattered. "I have to go, Vikram," she interrupted her cousin, mid-rant. "Running away from reality won't change it," Vikram fired back. "You're ruining your life for someone who won't even remember your sacrifice." Aisha ended the call as a knock sounded at the door. She smoothed her kurta and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly conscious of her appearance after the 18-hour journey from Delhi. When she opened the door, Rohan's eyes widened slightly before settling into a warm but cautious smile. "Aisha," he said, her name still comfortable in his mouth after all these years. "I heard you were back." "Just arrived," she replied. "Nani needs help." His expression shifted to something unreadable. "That's admirable. But what about your studies? Everyone says you were headed for great things." The old Aisha might have been wounded by the implication that caring for Nani wasn't great, but the woman who had deferred Stanford simply replied, "I already found them." Behind them, Nani called, out weakly, and Aisha turned away from possibilities that might have been toward the commitment she'd already made, unaware that this choice would reshape not just her life, but the lives of everyone in her family's orbit. Silent devotion. Autumn descended on Dehradun with a painter's touch. The flame-red gulmohar trees lining Nani's garden, the golden light that spilled through the windows each morning as Aisha helped her grandmother from bed. 3 months had passed since she'd arrived, and the rhythm of caregiving had become second nature. "Beta, you need to oil your hair properly," Nani scolded one morning as she watched Aisha hastily tie her long black hair into a messy bun. "No wonder it's getting so dry." Aisha smiled, knowing that even as Nani's body betrayed her, her spirit remained undiminished. "I'll do it tonight, I promise." "That's what you said yesterday," Nani huffed, but her eyes twinkled with affection. "In my day, a woman's hair was her crown. And in my day, we're too busy keeping the kingdom running to worry about the crown," Aisha teased, helping Nani into her wheelchair. The morning routine never varied. Medications with breakfast, short walk in the garden when Nani felt strong enough, physiotherapy exercises that left her exhausted but determined. Aisha had learned to measure progress in the smallest victories. A steadier hand, a step taken without support, a night without pain. One afternoon, as rain pattered against the windows, Aisha found a stack of dusty photo albums in the storeroom. She brought them to Nani, who was wrapped in a shawl in her favorite armchair. "I haven't seen these in years," Nani whispered, her fingers trembling as they traced the black and white photograph of a handsome young man in uniform. "Your grandfather, the day before he left for the border." "You never talk about him," Aisha said softly. "Some loves are too big for words," Nani replied. "He died thinking I was angry with him. We had quarreled the night before about something so trivial." Her voice trailed off. "That's why I've always told you children, don't let pride steal your happiness." Aisha thought of Rohan, who had been stopping by regularly since her return. Their conversations remained careful, circling around safe topics: the community hospital where he was designing a new wing, the books Aisha was reading to fill evening hours, childhood memories safe enough to revisit. Neither mentioned the summer they'd almost confessed feelings that had been growing since childhood. Life settled into a gentle monotony until Diwali approached. The house slowly filled with relatives arriving for the annual family gathering, uncles and aunties from Delhi, cousins from Mumbai and Bangalore, all bringing sweets, stories, and sideways glances at Aisha's choice to remain in Dehradun. "Such a waste," she overheard her Aunt Shalini whisper to another relative in the kitchen. "She could have been at Stanford, but instead she's here changing bedsheets. Parvati should have hired a nurse instead of letting the girl sacrifice her future." "Perhaps she's waiting for the inheritance," came the reply, so casually cruel that Aisha nearly dropped the tray of tea she was carrying. That evening, as Aisha strung marigold garlands across the veranda, Vikram approached. His designer watch caught the light as he leaned against a pillar, watching her work. "Still playing the martyr, I see," he said, helping himself to a laddu from the plate of sweets. "Still playing the insensitive jerk, I see," she replied without looking up. "Touché." He laughed. "But seriously, cousin, have you thought about what comes after? Nani might live another 10 years. Will you be wiping her brow when you're 35 and all your friends have careers, husbands, children?" Before she could answer, Rohan appeared at the garden gate, carrying a box of handmade diyas from his mother's shop. He'd been avoiding the growing crowd of relatives, but his eyes found Aisha immediately. "Perfect timing," Vikram said, a calculating gleam in his eye. "Rohan, talk some sense into our Aisha. Tell her that sacrificing her brilliant future to play nurse isn't noble. It's foolish." Rohan set down the box carefully. In the months since Aisha's return, they'd rebuilt a friendship that felt both familiar and frighteningly new. But he had never commented on her choice, never questioned her decision. "Not everyone measures life by the same yardstick, Vikram," Rohan said quietly. "Some count success in degrees and promotions, others in moments of grace and acts of love." "Poetic," Vikram sneered. "But poetry doesn't pay bills or build careers." "No," Aisha interjected, finding her voice. But it feeds the soul, and I've never felt my soul more nourished than these past months with Nani. Later, as relatives dispersed to prepare for evening prayers, Rohan helped Aisha hang the last of the lanterns along the garden path. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked. "About measuring life differently?" He was silent for a moment, focusing intently on securing a lantern to a branch. "When my father had his heart attack last year, I was in Singapore finalizing a major project. I missed saying goodbye by 3 hours. His voice remained steady, but his hands shook slightly. "I'd give back every award, every commission, every bit of recognition to have those 3 hours back." The confession hung between them, weighty and real. Before Aisha could respond, her mother called from the house. Nani was asking for her dot. As she turned to go, Rohan caught her hand briefly. "What you're doing matters, Aisha. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, as firecrackers illuminated the sky and laughter filled the house, Aisha sat beside Nani's bed, helping her sip warm milk. Outside the window, she could see her relatives celebrating, could hear Vikram's boisterous voice recounting some business triumph. But in the quiet of this room, watching her grandmother's eyes close in peaceful sleep, Aisha felt a certainty settle in her heart. She was exactly where she needed to be. The Whispers winter transformed Dehradun into a misty haven. Mornings dawned with frost silvering Nani's beloved rose bushes. Afternoons brought weak sunshine that barely warmed the old stone walls of the cottage. As the weather cooled, Nani's health took a similar turn. Good days became rarer, her lucidity more precious. "Something's not right," Dr. Mehra said one evening after his weekly checkup, his voice low as he spoke to Aisha in the hallway. "Her Parkinson's symptoms are progressing faster than expected. I'd like to run more tests." The next day brought a flurry of hospital visits, blood draws and scans that left Nani exhausted and Aisha tense with worry. When the results came back, Dr. Mehra's face confirmed what Aisha had feared. The diagnosis was more complicated than they'd thought. Lewy body dementia alongside the Parkinson's, a cruel combination that promised greater challenges ahead. "How long?" Aisha asked, her voice steady even as her world tilted. "6 months, perhaps a year," he replied gently. "Quality of life will deteriorate gradually. She'll need round-the-clock care soon." That night, after settling Nani in bed, Aisha sat alone on the back veranda watching the distant lights of the city below. The weight of the diagnosis pressed against her chest until tears came, not for the sacrifice of Stanford or her career, but for the inevitable loss of the woman who had shaped her life. A soft footfall interrupted her grief. Turning, she found Rohan standing hesitantly at the edge of the veranda, a thermos in hand. "Your mother mentioned you hadn't eaten," he said, holding up the container. "My mother sent soup." The simple kindness broke something in her. Without warning, Aisha found herself sobbing, months of careful composure crumbling. Rohan was beside her in an instant, his arm around her shoulders solid and warm. "It's Lewy body dementia," she managed between breaths. "Along with the Parkinson's. She's not going to get better." They sat in silence after her tears subsided, sharing the soup as the night deepened around them. Neither mentioned how his hand had found hers in the darkness, or how naturally their fingers had interlaced. "I should go," Rohan said eventually, though he made no move to leave. "I'm helping at the community center tomorrow. They're having a winter fundraiser." "I remember how you used to volunteer there in school," Aisha said. "You'd skip cricket practice to teach the children art." He looked surprised. "You noticed that?" "I noticed everything about you back then," she admitted, the late hour and emotional exhaustion lowering her usual guards. His eyes, always expressive, darkened with something unreadable. "And now?" Before she could answer, Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother saying Nani was awake and asking for her. The moment slipped away, joining all their other unfinished conversations. News of Nani's worsening condition spread through the family network with unsettling speed. Within days, relatives who had shown little interest in the matriarch's welfare suddenly found reasons to visit Dehradun. First came Uncle Pramod from Chandigarh, his calculating wife Kiran in tow, bearing expensive but impractical gifts for Nani. They spent more time inspecting the house, commenting on the antique furniture, the hand-woven Persian carpets, the silver collection, than sitting with Nani herself. "Such a beautiful property," Kiran murmured, running her fingers over a rosewood cabinet. "It must be worth a fortune now that Dehradun is developing so quickly." Next arrived Vikram, allegedly on a business trip but spending curiously little time on business calls. He took to wandering the property, making notes in his phone about potential improvements once the situation resolved itself, euphemisms that made Aisha's blood boil. "Have you seen the land deed?" he asked casually, over breakfast one morning. "I'm just curious about the property boundaries. For tax purposes, of course." "No, I've been too busy caring for our dying grandmother to worry about her property boundaries," Aisha snapped, her patience worn thin. Vikram quote-s expression hardened. "Don't pretend you're the only one who cares, Aisha. We all love Nani in our own ways." "Is that why you visited twice in 8 years?" The argument might have escalated if not for the arrival of Nani's oldest friend, Lakshmi Auntie, a retired high court judge with a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately silenced Vikram's protests. "Vultures circle when they sense death," Lakshmi Auntie remarked that evening as she helped Aisha prepare Nani's evening medications. "I've seen it in my own family. Suddenly everyone remembers their love for the dying when there's property involved." "I don't care about the inheritance," Aisha said honestly. "I just want more time with her." Lakshmi studied her thoughtfully. "Parvati knows that. It's why she trusts you above all others." That night, Aisha found Nani awake well past midnight, sitting up in bed and looking through an old wooden box of letters. "I couldn't sleep," Nani explained, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Too many thoughts crowding my mind." Aisha sat beside her, helping to sort the yellowed pages. "What kind of thoughts?" "About legacies," Nani said, her gnarled fingers tracing the faded ink of a letter. "About what we leave behind when we go. Not just property and money, but the imprints we make on hearts." She selected a particular envelope, sealed and addressed in her neat handwriting. "Keep this safe for me. Open it only after I'm gone." "Nani, don't talk like that." "Hush, child. Death doesn't come faster just because we acknowledge it." She pressed the envelope into Aisha's hands. "Promise me you'll wait to open it." "I promise." Aisha whispered. As January gave way to February, the stream of visiting relatives continued. Some came with genuine concern, others with poorly disguised interest in Nani's assets. Through it all, Rohan remained a steady presence, stopping by with groceries, fixing leaky faucets, or simply sitting with Nani when Aisha needed rest. One evening, as they sat together on the veranda watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple, Rohan asked the question Aisha had been dreading. "After Nani," he began hesitantly, "will you go back? To Stanford?" The possibility hung between them. Her departure, another separation, all their unspoken feelings once again buried beneath practical considerations and geographical distance. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything feels different now. I'm different." His hand found hers in the gathering twilight. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I—" A crash from inside the house interrupted them. They rushed inside to find Nani collapsed in the hallway, her breathing labored, her eyes unfocused. As Rohan called for an ambulance, Aisha cradled her grandmother's head in her lap, whispering reassurances even as fear gripped her heart. In the chaos that followed, the ambulance, the emergency room, The grim-faced doctors. One thought kept returning. There had been recognition in Nani's eyes just before she collapsed, a moment of perfect clarity in which she had whispered, "Remember what matters, Beta. The rest is just noise." Final moments. The hospital room was sterile and cold, its beeping monitors and antiseptic smell a stark contrast to the warm, spice-scented comfort of Nani's cottage. For 3 weeks, Aisha barely left her grandmother's side, sleeping in a chair. That made her back ache, eating whatever Rohan or her mother brought from home. The parade of relatives continued, each visit more strained than the last as it became clear that Nani was slipping away. Uncle Pramod paced the corridors, making hushed phone calls about estate matters. Vikram alternated between feigned concern at Nani's bedside and thinly veiled inquiries to hospital staff about her prognosis. "You need to rest," Dr. Mehra urged. Aisha one evening, finding her massaging Nani's motionless hands. "Your grandmother wouldn't want you to exhaust yourself." "I'll rest later," she replied, not looking up from her task. "Right now, I need to be here." "She might not regain consciousness," he said gently. The stroke was severe and combined with her existing conditions. "She knows I'm here," Aisha insisted. "She squeezes my hand sometimes." Dr. Mehra didn't argue, just patted her shoulder kindly before leaving. The moment the door closed, Aisha's composure cracked. She laid her head beside Nani's hand on the white hospital sheets and allowed herself to weep quiet, shuddering sobs that came from the deepest part of her being. "I'm not ready," she whispered to her unconscious grandmother. "I still need your wisdom, your stories, your terrible jokes that only you think are funny." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I need you to see what I become, to know if I made the right choices." A gentle knock interrupted her grief. Rohan entered, carrying a thermos of chai and a paper bag that smelled of fresh samosas. He'd been coming every evening after finishing work, sometimes just sitting quietly beside her, sometimes sharing stories of his day to fill the sterile silence. "Any change?" he asked. Pouring chai into a paper cup for her Dot, Aisha shook her head. "The doctors say it's just a matter of time now." They sat together in the growing darkness, the hospital gradually quieting around them as visiting hours ended. Rohan didn't offer empty reassurances or philosophical platitudes about death being natural. Instead, he simply remained, a solid presence beside her as the night deepened. "Tell me something about your grandfather," he said suddenly. "Nani's husband. You mentioned once that she rarely spoke of him." The unexpected request momentarily pulled Aisha from her grief. "He died in the 1971 war," she said. "They had been married just 3 years. Nani never remarried, though apparently many tried to court her." She smiled faintly. "She told me once that when you've tasted the sun, candlelight no longer satisfies." "That's beautiful," Rohan said. "And true, I think." Something in his voice made Aisha look up. He was watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter, a mixture of tenderness and certainty that seemed to say volumes. "Aisha," he began, "when all this is over, I want to—" The door swung open as a night nurse entered to check Nani's vital signs, the moment once again interrupted. By the time the nurse left, the spell had broken, and Rohan soon departed with a promise to return in the morning. That night, as if sensing Aisha needed solitude, none of the relatives appeared. The hours stretched long and quiet, marked only by the steady beep of monitors and the occasional footsteps of hospital staff in the corridor outside. Near dawn, something changed. A slight flutter of Nani's eyelids, a deeper breath that seemed to fill her frail chest more fully. Aisha, dozing in her chair, jerked awake immediately. "Nani?" she whispered, leaning close. To her astonishment, her grandmother's eyes opened, clear and focused in a way they hadn't been since before the stroke. Nani's lips moved, struggling to form words. Water, Aisha guessed, helping her take tiny sips through a straw dot. Nani shook her head weakly, her fingers tightening around Aisha's hand with surprising strength. Listen, she managed, her voice a dry whisper. Aisha leaned closer. The envelope, Nani said, and the key in my prayer box. Take it before... She paused, gathering strength. Before the others search the house? What key? What does it open? Aisha asked, confused. Nani Quote's eyes drifted to the window, where the first light of dawn was breaking over the distant mountains. You'll understand. Trust yourself. And trust him. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He looks at you the way your grandfather looked at me. Before Aisha could ask more, Nani's grip tightened painfully. Promise me you won't let them take what's yours, she whispered urgently. Promise me you'll be brave enough to claim your happiness. I promise, Aisha said, tears streaming down. Her face. Nani seemed to relax then, her eyes still fixed on the brightening sky. Such a beautiful sunrise, she murmured, like the day I met your grandfather. Those were her last words. As the sun broke fully over the horizon, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and pink, Parvati Devi took her final breath. Her hand still clasped tightly in her granddaughter. The hospital room filled quickly after that. Doctors confirming what Aisha already knew, nurses offering condolences, relatives arriving with performative grief. Through it all, Aisha sat, silent, her grandmother's cryptic words echoing in her mind. Later, as the family gathered at the cottage to begin funeral preparations, Aisha slipped away to Nani's bedroom. The prayer box sat on the nightstand where it always had, a small wooden chest inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Inside, beneath prayer beads and handwritten Sanskrit shlokas, she found a small brass key tied with red thread. As she held it, wondering what lock it might open, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Uncle Pramod and Vikram, their voices low but urgent. The solicitor said the will reading is scheduled for next week, Pramod was saying. But we should start inventorying the valuables now, before things go missing. Agreed, came Vikram's reply. And we need to find those land documents. This property could be worth crores if developed properly. Aisha slipped the key into her pocket just as they passed the doorway. For the first time since Nani's death, a feeling other than grief surfaced: determination. Whatever her grandmother had wanted her to find, she would protect it with everything she had. That evening, as relatives filled the house with the sounds of mourning and preparation, Aisha found herself drawn to the garden where she and Nani had spent countless hours. The winter roses were in bloom, their fragrance sweet in the cold air. A familiar figure stood by the old stone bench. Rohan, his face solemn in the gathering dusk. When he saw her, he opened his arms without a word, and Aisha stepped into his embrace, finally allowing herself to be held, to be comforted. She woke up at the end, Aisha said against his shoulder. She spoke to me. What did she say? He asked softly. Aisha pulled back slightly to look at him, remembering Nani's words. He looks at you the way your grandfather looked at me. In the fading light, she saw what her grandmother had seen. Not just sympathy or friendship, but something deeper. Something that had perhaps been there all along. She told me to be brave enough to claim my happiness, she replied. His hand came up to brush a tear from her cheek, the gesture unbearably tender. And will you? Before she could answer, they were interrupted by calls from the house. The priest had arrived to discuss funeral arrangements. Reality intruded, postponing once again the conversation they seemed destined never to finish. As Aisha turned to go, Rohan caught her hand. Whatever happens next, he said quietly, I'm here. Not just for now, but for as long as you'll have me. The promise carried her through the long night of vigil, through the rituals of grief that followed, through the gathering storm of family politics that swirled around Nani's legacy. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. And Aisha found herself both dreading and longing for the revelation that awaited. Legacy of love. 7 days after Nani's funeral, the family gathered in the living room of the cottage where generations of celebrations and sorrows had played out. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air, illuminating the tense faces of relatives who had barely spoken since the cremation. Mr. Kapoor, Nani's solicitor for over 40 years, sat at the dining table converted to a makeshift desk. His weathered hands carefully arranged papers as the family settled into an expectant silence. Aisha sat slightly apart, the brass key a weight in her pocket, Nani's sealed envelope tucked inside her journal. "Before I begin the formal reading," Mr. Kapoor said, adjusting his glasses, "Parvatiji asked me to read a personal message." He cleared his throat and began. "To my beloved family, if you are hearing this, I have finally reunited with my Rajiv after 50 years apart. Do not mourn me too deeply. I have lived a full life, rich with love both given and received. But I have watched with sadness how wealth and property have poisoned our family bonds, turning blood relations into business competitors." Around the room, eyes lowered guiltily, though some, like Vikram and Uncle Pramod, shifted uncomfortably. "In my final years," the letter continued, "I have seen clearly who values me for myself, and who sees only what I might leave behind. Judge not lest ye be judged, the holy books say. So I pass no judgment on those who came only when death approached. Instead, I leave you with this wisdom. What we own in life ultimately owns us, unless we transform possession into purpose." Mr. Kapoor paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. "Now to the distribution of my estate, which some of you have been anticipating with greater interest than you showed in my well-being." A nervous titter ran through the room, quickly silenced. "To my son, Pramod, I leave my collection of books, including your father's journals which you have never read but might find enlightening. To my nephew Vikram, I leave my husband's pocket watch. May it remind you that time once spent cannot be regained or repurchased." Vikram's face darkened, his fingers clenching on the armrest of his chair. The solicitor continued through a list of modest bequests, jewelry to female relatives, small cash gifts to old servants, donations to local charities. With each item, the tension in the room grew, as it became clear that the substantial assets, the property, the savings, remained unmentioned. Finally, Mr. Kapoor looked up, his eyes finding Aisha. "And to my granddaughter Aisha, who returned to me when I needed her most, who gave without expectation of return, I leave the remainder of my estate, including this house and all its contents, my savings and investments, and my shares in Devi Enterprises." A stunned silence fell, broken by Uncle Pramod's sputtering protest. "Devi Enterprises? That company was liquidated decades ago." "No," Mr. Kapoor replied calmly. "It was restructured. Parvatiji maintained a controlling interest but chose to keep this information private." He handed Aisha a folder. "The company owns 3 commercial properties in Delhi and has substantial holdings in pharmaceutical research. The current valuation exceeds 30 crore rupees." The room erupted. Accusations flew: undue influence, manipulation, secret dealings. Through it all, Aisha sat motionless, the folder unopened in her lap, feeling strangely detached from the chaos around her. "There is one additional condition." Mr. Kapoor raised his voice over the commotion. "Should Aisha choose to contest this will or divide the inheritance, everything goes to the Rajiv Devi Memorial Trust for Girls' Education." This silenced the protests immediately. No one could argue against Aisha's right to keep everything without, revealing their own greed. As the meeting dissolved into murmured conversations and pointed glares, Aisha slipped away to Nani's bedroom. She closed the door, shutting out the noise, and finally opened the envelope her grandmother had given her weeks ago. Inside was a letter and a faded photograph of a young Nani standing beside a handsome man in military uniform, Aisha's grandfather. Their hands were intertwined, their faces alight with joy. "My dearest Aisha," the letter began, "if you are reading this, I have left this world, but not before seeing in you the same spirit that drew me to your grandfather, a heart that gives without counting the cost. The wealth I leave you is substantial, but the true inheritance is this wisdom. Love is the only investment that never loses value." Tears blurred Aisha's vision as she continued reading. "The brass key you found opens the hidden compartment in the rosewood cabinet in my dressing room. Inside, you will find documents for a foundation I began in your grandfather's name, but never launched. My dream of a school for girls from villages like ours, where potential often withers for lack of opportunity. This is the true purpose of our family wealth. Not to divide us, but to multiply opportunity for others." The letter ended with a postscript that made Aisha's heart skip. "As for the young architect who looks at you the way Rajiv once looked at me, some loves are worth changing plans for. Stanford will always be there, but the heart's timing waits for no degree. Trust an old woman who knows the cost of opportunities missed. When love and purpose align, the universe is offering a gift. Be wise enough to accept it." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Rohan standing there, concern etched on his features. "Your uncle is threatening legal action," he said. "It's getting ugly downstairs." "Let them fight," Aisha replied with unexpected calm. Nani knew exactly what she was doing. She showed him the key, explaining what it opened. Together, they found the hidden compartment, discovering detailed plans for a school, architectural drawings, curriculum outlines. Years of careful planning hidden away, waiting for the right moment. "She was extraordinary," Rohan murmured, leafing through the documents. "Even at the end, she was thinking about others." "She was thinking about legacy," Aisha corrected gently. "About what remains when everything else fades." Later that evening, after the relatives had departed, some with cold formality, others, like her mother, with tearful embraces and whispered pride, Aisha and Rohan sat in the garden where their story had begun and paused so many times. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Stanford is still waiting." Aisha looked down at Nani's plans spread between them on the bench. "I'm thinking of deferring for another year," she said. "There's a foundation to establish, a school to build." She glanced up at him, heart pounding. "And maybe other foundations to lay as well." His eyes held hers, the question in them clear. "Nani told me something just before she died," Aisha said, gathering courage. "She said you look at me the way my grandfather looked at her." "I've been wondering if that's true." Rohan's smile was slow and certain. "I've been looking at you that way since we were 16, he admitted. "I just never thought you noticed." "I noticed everything," she whispered. "I just wasn't brave enough to say it." "And now?" His hand found hers on the bench between them. "Now, I know what matters," she replied, lacing her fingers through his. "The rest is just noise." Spring came early that year to Dehradun. As the first green buds appeared on the trees around the cottage, construction began on the Rajiv and Parvati, Davi school for girls on land that had once grown only rice but would now nurture generations of minds. Aisha moved between meetings with contractors and educators, her Stanford acceptance deferred but not forgotten. Merely reimagined as part of a larger plan, Vikram eventually withdrew his threats of legal action, especially after Aisha offered him a position on the foundation's board. Not out of forgiveness, but out of recognition that his business acumen could serve a purpose greater than his ego. It was what Nani would have done. On a warm evening in March, Aisha stood in Nani's garden, now blooming with new life. The weight of grief had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something that fueled rather than depleted her. She felt her grandmother's presence in every decision, every small victory, every moment of purpose discovered. Rohan joined her, architectural plans for the school in hand. "The contractors approved the final design," he said, his free arm slipping around her waist with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. "Construction begins next week." "Nani would have loved it," Aisha said, leaning into him. "She did love it," he corrected gently. "She saw the plans. I showed her months ago, when you were napping after a long night. She made some very specific suggestions about the library windows." Aisha turned to him in surprise. "You never told me." His expression was tender. "She made me promise not to. She said some things needed to unfold in their own time." He hesitated, then added, "She also told me not to wait too long to tell you how I felt." "Life is shorter than you think," she said. Aisha smiled through sudden tears. She always did give the best advice. As twilight settled over the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Rohan took both her hands in his. "I've been carrying this question for months," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Through hospital visits and funeral arrangements and will readings, never finding the right moment. But Nani was right. Life is too short to wait for perfect timing." Aisha's heart quickened as he continued, "I love you, Aisha. I think I always have. Whatever comes next, Stanford, the foundation, all of it, I want to face it together." The simplicity of the declaration, without grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, was perfectly them, built on friendship, strengthened by shared purpose, deepened by mutual respect. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and absolutely natural. "And yes, whatever comes next, we face it together." As darkness fell and stars appeared over Nani's garden, Aisha thought of her grandmother's words about legacies. Not just what we leave behind, but the imprints we make on hearts. In choosing to return, in choosing love over ambition and presence over prestige, she had received a gift greater than any inheritance, the understanding that wealth without purpose was poverty, and that love, in all its forms, was the truest measure of a life well lived.